Hello, and welcome to the next episode in our Gifted Education series. Today, we're going to be focusing on the topic of perfectionism. My name is Dr. Jo Tuite, and I thank you for joining me. Let me give you just a little bit about my background. I've worked in the field of gifted education for almost 35 years, and my educational background is a bit varied. I have undergraduate degrees in business administration and sociology, a master's in educational administration, and a doctorate in educational leadership with a focus on gifted education. And then lending context to my education would be my 4 kiddos. I am a very proud parent of 4 kids that have their educational backgrounds have run kind of the educational spectrum, if you will, from needing special education services to being a creative thinker, a high achiever, and a high ability or gifted learner. They have truly given me a wonderful parent perspective. So that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and jump into our session. Again, we're focusing today on perfectionism. In addition to my own experiences and background, I'll be utilizing quite a few other resources to inform the presentation today. You'll see on your screen there a list of a few of those references, especially those top 3 I'd like to draw your attention to. And then let me go ahead and advance the screen here, and you'll see that the resources are actually quite varied. Let's go ahead and jump in with the definition of perfectionism. Basically, perfectionism is that feeling that a person has that anything short of perfect is unacceptable. And it's often accompanied by unrealistic and sometimes very fluid goals. And the belief that if whatever the end result isn't perfect, then it's a sign of failure and a sign of their own personal worthlessness. So with that definition in mind, let's take a look at and unpack the 2 types of perfectionism. So you can see on the screen there in front of you that we have 2 basic types of perfectionism. We have adaptive and maladaptive. And if you can picture, they kind of sit on opposite ends of a spectrum. Adaptive is often considered the more positive of perfectionism, where maladaptive is considered negative or problematic. You could go ahead and kind of see there the list of characteristics or attributes that kind of fall under each of those. With the adaptive or the positive perfectionism, students often feel curious, they're motivated, they're energetic, they're creative, enthusiastic, and they feel pleasure and a sense of accomplishment with the results of whatever they might be working on. You can perhaps sometimes hear them saying things such as, I compare my scores with those of my past performance instead of comparing themselves to other people. There are many possible ways to do something well. Failing at something is part of being a person. So again, these are adaptive or positive aspects of perfectionism. At the opposite end of that spectrum, as I mentioned, we have the maladaptive or that negative, problematic perfectionism. A result of students sitting in that space is a developing sense of a fear of failure, which can then lead to low self-esteem, feelings of low self-worth, which can also lead to depression and anxiety. And while anxiety is quite prevalent with this student population as a whole, when it comes to perfectionism and perfectionistic tendencies, that anxiety can be heightened. It can also be, you can also see links to procrastination, and we'll touch just a little bit on that here in a bit. You can also see students who are sitting in this maladaptive area become like a workaholic, working extremely long and hard hours on specific assignments that don't necessarily necessitate that much time. Students are not necessarily rooted at one end or another of this spectrum. They're not static, they are quite fluid. And so at different times, they may move to different places on that perfectionistic spectrum, if you will. So let's talk for just a little bit about maladaptive perfectionism. When we're looking at high achievers as a group, they are typically able to bounce back pretty easily from disappointment, whereas high achievers who are perfectionists or who have perfectionistic tendencies, they tend to beat themselves up and they sit in that negative space or in those negative feelings for longer, and they really struggle to move on from that. And they can often have or experience kind of an all or nothing thinking, where everything, whatever they're working on, has to be absolutely perfect. And if it's not perfect, has one little flaw or not meeting the standard or the goal that they've set for themselves, not necessarily what a teacher has set for themselves, but what they have set for themselves, then they see that as a failure. One of the frustrating aspects of perfectionism and perfectionistic tendencies is that more likely than not, the person experiencing this can never actually reach perfection with whatever they're working on. They always see there's one more thing I could change, one more thing I can tweak. And so they can never reach that level of perfection that they're seeking. They also can look at things with a very critical eye. And they're not just looking at their own work with a critical eye, but they're looking at the work of others with that very critical eye. So whereas high achievers kind of take pride in their accomplishments and tend to reach out and be supportive of others, right? A high achiever with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies, they're not only spotting all of their mistakes or perceived mistakes, but also those of others. So you can imagine that, let's say they're working in a group situation together, and the person with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies is constantly pointing out their errors or their flaws in the work and those of others. That can create perhaps a not so comfortable group working environment. They also can experience kind of this push-pull concept, right? So again, when we're looking at high achievers as a group, they're often pulled toward their goals by that desire to achieve the goal. And they're happy with any positive forward-moving steps toward that end goal. Where you have your high achiever with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies, they're kind of pushed toward that goal, and they're pushed by fear, fear that anything less than perfection is not meeting the goal. So you can kind of visualize two completely different ways of looking at that goal, looking at the end result, and how they're getting there or trying to get there. Persons with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies can also have very unrealistic standards. They tend to set goals that might not be reasonable, and often set goals and standards that can be higher or more complicated or challenging than even a teacher is setting for an assignment, for example. So where your high achievers, they still set high goals for themselves, but they tend to have fun going a little bit further. They reach that goal and then they can have fun, maybe go a little bit further than that goal. But if they don't, that's okay. They're happy with those steps towards the goal. Whereas your high achievers that are have these perfectionistic tendencies, again, they have set a goal above and beyond. They can never reach the goal and never reach that above and beyond because, again, they're seeking perfection, which they just can't reach. And then the final thing there is kind of focusing on the results. And I've kind of already touched on that with the unrealistic standards, but by way of comparison, again, high achievers are enjoying that process of chasing the goal as much as reaching the goal. And the perfectionists, they see the goal, they see nothing else but that goal, and they're so concerned with reaching it that and avoiding failure or perceived failure that they can't enjoy the process of actually getting there. And so these things lead to fear of failure, procrastination, defensiveness, and low self-esteem, which are all large parts of anxiety, right? So we've already talked a little bit about the fear of failure, but one thing I want to mention about that is with our students who have perfectionistic tendencies, they are not only concerned with meeting and exceeding that goal of perfection, but they're very afraid of disappointing others. And so they don't want to disappoint people. They don't want to hurt that image, whether it's their actual image or their perception of their image. They don't want to damage that. And so, like I mentioned before, if it's not perfect, then it's a failure. With procrastination, this can become a big part of the life of a perfectionist because they have that strong sense of fear of failure, sometimes so much so that they almost freeze, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they freeze and can't really start, or if they start, they kind of freeze and can't get to the end. So because they're so afraid, they become basically immobilized and not able to progress. And so when that happens, though, then that, as you can imagine, adds to that fear of failure, and it kind of becomes a really bad cycle that they get into. And then defensiveness. So high achievers, again, looking at our high achievers group here, they see criticism as valuable information, good feedback, things that they can take and work on and run with. Perfectionists, though, they see constructive criticism and they become defensive because it is it's almost painful for them, and it's scary because, again, it's hurting their image or their perceived image. And again, let's touch on the low self-esteem. I think I may have mentioned a little bit about that already, but high achievers, they have high self-esteem. Perfectionists tend to be self-critical, which can lead to unhappiness. And unhappiness can lead to lower self-esteem. It can also cause them to feel lonely and isolated and even push others away, which again perpetuates that lonely and isolated. So all of these things, again, they're creating just a kind of a perpetual cycle. So I attended a fantastic presentation a few weeks ago by Dr. Klepper, who I've mentioned in the resources list there. And she was talking about positive perfectionism. But one of the things that she shared was this problematic perfectionism quiz. And I borrowed her questions, put it on the screen for you to take a look at. And I think it gives you a great way to begin thinking about and assessing whether or not your student is a high achiever or a high achiever who's demonstrating perfectionistic tendencies or is fully ingrained in perfectionism. Or maybe it's something that can help you see where you're at in that as well. So I'm not going to read these, but I want to give you just a moment or two to kind of take a look at that as it's on your screen. Next, let's take a look at the characteristics that perfectionists may display. On the screen in front of you, you'll see a list of some of the characteristics of a perfectionist. And I'm not going to take your time and go through all of these, but I do want to kind of highlight a few of those. A student that has perfectionistic tendencies may overcommit. So they may take on more than they can actually handle. Now, if this was our high achiever student, those commitments may absolutely be manageable because they're not striving for that unreachable perfectionism that our high achiever with perfectionistic tendencies may be reaching for. So again, they're tending to overcommit. They rarely delegate work to other people. They tend to take all the work on themselves. Even in group projects, you can see that taking place where the student with perfectionistic tendencies is taking on everything. They're not delegating because they're seeing not only their areas that they need to work on, their mistakes, but the mistakes of others, and so they'd much rather take that on and do it all themselves. They can also have a hard time making choices, again, because everything holds so much weight for our kiddos that are dealing with perfectionistic tendencies. And they always have to be the person in control. We can also see that our high achieving students with perfectionistic tendencies never seem to be satisfied with their work. And they frequently are criticizing other students because, again, all they're seeing are mistakes in themselves and in others. And they tend to pay more attention to negative comments as opposed to positive comments, because negative comments means to them that there is an area that they are not perfect in. And so that's where they're going to pay attention, because they want and need to be perfect. So with these characteristics in mind, let's go ahead and consider what a perfectionist thinks. I do want to take just a moment and actually read through all of the things that you're seeing on your screen and perhaps add a little bit more context to a few of those. Again, we're looking at what a perfectionist thinks. So from a perfectionistic standpoint, everything is black and white. Now, for most of us, things are black, white, and a million different shades of gray, right? But for a student with perfectionistic tendencies, they only see black and white. Anything that might be sitting there in gray, to them are signs of confused thinking. They may be thinking, I have to be the best at everything I do. Again, for them, anything less than the best is not good enough. I made a mistake, therefore something is wrong with me. I have to do more than everybody else. I have to stay ahead. I have to win. Again, I have to be the best. Every detail must be perfect. There's absolutely no room for mistakes. Mistakes means I have failed. I am not worthy. If I make a mistake, people will think I'm stupid. They'll think I'm not good enough. They'll think I'm unlikable. They'll not believe I am smart. Tasks should be done correctly the first time, and every detail within that task must be done to perfection. I just can't do anything right. Again, because they don't believe it's perfect. If I can't do it perfectly, what's the point of doing it? Perfectionists put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves, and in many ways their self-worth is tied to doing things absolutely perfectly. And if they fail, whether it's a true failure or it's their perceived failure based upon their own definition and their own goal of perfectionism, like I said, they're super hard on themselves. They see themselves as worthless, stupid, unlikable, unworthy, and so on. Because this is what they think, imperfection takes on a greater meaning. So let's take a moment and look at imperfection. Klepper shares that the risk of not being perfect becomes a perceived threat, and these threats can result in the student either fighting, taking flight, or freezing. So let's talk about these for just a moment. In that fight response, this is where the student takes on a more of a confrontational approach to the threat, and they may overwork themselves, which can result in meltdowns. It can result in tantrums, but they're trying to fight or battle that perceived threat. Sometimes our students with perfectionistic tendencies might take flight, and that is the instinct to escape whatever that perceived threat might be. So they may avoid doing a task or an assignment, or may flat out refuse. They may have apathy toward that. They are doing whatever they can then to get away from whatever that perceived threat is. And other students may freeze up. They actually have a reactive immobility when faced with their perceived threat. This involves them shutting down and taking no action. Now, it can be at the start, not even being able to start an assignment, or starting it but never being able to progress or to get near that goal or finish line, because they've just become immobilized with the fear of failure, the fear of this perceived threat. It is really important to remember that they aren't necessarily getting upset over nothing at all, but their reactions don't always match the severity of whatever that situation may be. You've probably seen the fight, flight, or freeze associated with other things, and it's very similar, just takes on a little different meaning or action when you're looking at it in terms of students with perfectionistic tendencies. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about what perfectionism looks like in children and teens. So perfectionism can present in children and teens in lots of different ways. And so we're going to take a look, just a quick look at the list that you see here on the screen in front of you. Children and teens can have the tendency to become highly anxious, angry, or upset about making mistakes. And this can be more of an overreaction. You see a lot of high achieving students, worry about making mistakes. But with our high achieving students with perfectionistic tendencies, it seems almost to be an exaggeration of response to mistakes, but for them this is very real. It's not an over-exaggeration. It may display as chronic procrastination and difficulty completing tasks. That associates right back to that freeze response that I mentioned, where they are in that position of feeling a perceived threat, feeling that perception that they can't do this, they're going to fail so badly that they can't even start it, or if they do start it, they can't complete it. It can present as students who are easily frustrated and give up easily, or having a chronic fear of embarrassment and humiliation. My high ability student that I mentioned, that she struggled considerably with this. Even like the most minor things would be a huge embarrassment or humiliate her tremendously. And so that was definitely a struggle for us to try to overcome. It can also present in children and teens as overly cautious and very thorough in their tasks. For example, they may have a homework assignment that for most students, reasonable students, it would take about maybe 20 minutes to do, and they could be still working on it at the 3-hour mark. So they're just overly cautious in how they're approaching it, and extremely thorough in each of the steps, and making sure, again, looking for perfection. They can, when it comes to like writing, this will be the student that you find writing and rewriting and rewriting. Sometimes I think it might have been on Clever's quiz, but you get the holes in paper because they've erased and erased and erased, right? Maybe not so much anymore, since most things are on the iPad or Chromebook or computer, but again, it presents as writing and rewriting and rewriting. They can also present as frequent, catastrophic meltdowns, or reactions to things that may not be going as they expected, as they hoped. They're not going perfectly. It can also display as a refusal to try new things, because this is a risk for students with perfectionistic tendencies. It can also display as declining participation in activities in order to avoid disappointment and failing to live up to unreasonably high standards that they have for themselves and or that they perceive others having of them. So these are just a few of the ways that perfectionism can present in teens and children. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the coping strategies that they may fall into or may utilize. So let's go ahead and switch slides there. So you can see on your screen there 4 common coping strategies that high ability students with perfectionistic tendencies might utilize. The first one mentioned there is a task-oriented coping, right? So this is more of a problem-focused strategy where the individual assumes that the situation can be changed. And Wilkinson says that it involves taking direct action to alter that situation and reduce the amount of stress experienced. The next one that you see there on the screen is the emotion-oriented coping strategy. And this tends to be based on trying to reduce negative emotions, typically through avoidance of the situation or denial of the even existence of the issue, or by giving up hope and assuming that the situation just simply can't be fixed or rectified. The next one is distraction, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Feeling that the situation can't be fixed or rectified, or just avoiding the issue or situation altogether, and engaging in other issues and situations, hence not actually ever confronting the problem. And then the final one there is social distraction, and that's based on either seeking diversions from the issue by turning to others or trying to get others to assist with or deal with the issue at hand. So again, those 4 types: task-oriented coping, emotion-oriented coping, distraction, and social diversion. Let's think for just a moment back to one of the earlier slides where we looked at adaptive, which was the positive type of perfectionism, and maladaptive, which is the negative or problematic type of perfectionism on the spectrum, the 2 ends of the spectrum there. So let's think for a moment of these 4 coping strategies and where they might fall on that spectrum. Let me give you a moment to think about it. Okay, so let's think about the task-oriented coping strategy. Where do you think that one falls? If you said adaptive, you are correct. What about emotion-oriented? Maladaptive, absolutely. Distraction also falls on maladaptive. And social diversion strategies. Adaptive perfectionists kind of turn to lend to that one. So again, those are kind of how they fall on that spectrum. Again, fluid, so they can move as well, and not set in stone, but that kind of gives you an idea of where they may fall. So this has been just a little bit of information, actually maybe quite a bit of information, and what we can do as parents to help our kids is kind of what I want to focus on next. So you see on your screen there several ideas on different ways we can help as parents. I'm not going to read all of those, but I do want to just highlight a couple of them. First, adhering to a schedule that limits the amount of time a student can spend on assignments can actually be a really big help. Again, the goal for them completing the task, completing the assignment, is to complete it and not make it perfect. And so sometimes setting a time restraint can actually be very helpful. Also helping them to take a look at those big assignments and breaking them down into small pieces, again with time limits on the pieces, because the goal is to complete it, not to make it perfect. We can also help our high ability students with perfectionistic tendencies learn how to set priorities and gain balance. One of the things that I have tried and utilized myself with my high ability student who had perfectionistic tendencies was the night before we would look at the things that she needed to do the next day, and she would set priorities. What she had to get done, what she wanted to get done. And we would set time restraints on some of those activities. And I would assist her a lot in the beginning, less so at the end after she kind of got the hang of it, in identifying which tasks needed like 100% of her energy and which ones needed less than 100% of her energy. And then the next day, at the end of the day, as we were getting ready to set the goals for the next day or priorities for the next day, we talk about, okay, how did it go? Did you set the priorities well? Did you overcommit? Did you go over your time limits? How did it feel when you selected those priorities? And how does it feel now at the end of the day? So connecting back to what she had done and being able to reflect on that. Another question that I would highly recommend asking is whether or not at the end of the day she felt mentally energized or mentally drained. And then you can talk about, especially if it's draining, what caused it to be draining. So again, all of those pieces of self-reflection. We want to make sure that we're helping our high ability students with perfectionistic tendencies to invest enough time so the task is good enough, but not become draining and not lead them in that spiral of low self-esteem and depression and anxiety and so forth. And we want them to also make sure that they have time for other hobbies and activities, time with friends, time with family, and all of those things that we know make life worthwhile, right? We can also help our children understand that their image is not based solely on doing things perfect, that they are made up of a lot more than perfection. And it's important to point out to them those things within their personalities, within their character, that make them who they are. So again, we're trying to take the focus off of that belief that perfectionism is what defines them, and letting them see those other parts and characteristics of themselves that make them who they are. And then help them challenge that all or nothing thinking by helping them to seek compromises and helping them, calling them on it and calling ourselves on it when we use words like always, never, all, should, must, and replacing those then. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And then let's see, let me just mention one more, and that is helping them to see that failure is their first attempt in learning, and that mistakes actually help them to learn and to grow. That is a tough one, and I know I've shared that before in previous episodes of the Gifted series, but I do think it's so extremely important that our high ability students understand that failing or perception of failing in something, not getting it perfect, that is actually a good thing because it's helping them to grow. It's helping their brains to grow. It's helping them to learn. So I mentioned a moment ago about using the words always, never, all, about, should, that type of thing. So let's talk for just a moment about modifying and monitoring our language so that it can be helpful to our students with perfectionistic tendencies. So you can see, once again, I'm utilizing some of Klepper's information. Dr. Klepper had a fantastic group or set of information that she shared, and I'm happy to pass this knowledge along. This is a list of those things of what to say or what not to say. On the left side are phrases and things that as parents we probably say a lot. Practice makes perfect. Oh my gosh, I used that one so much until I saw that it was becoming a problem. Using phrases like I understand or I know, and then again, as I mentioned before, always, never. So instead of saying some of those, let's look at that right-hand column and see what we can replace them with. So practice makes perfect, we can replace with practice makes better. Perhaps not, doesn't roll off the tongue quite as easily, but definitely has a better impact with our high ability students who have those perfectionistic tendencies. Talking about something, and instead of saying, yeah, I know or I understand, for any of us, but I think especially for those students that are struggling with perfectionistic tendencies, hearing those words invalidates what they're feeling, and they just can't understand how anybody else could possibly ever be feeling and experiencing what they are. So replacing those phrases with I bet, or for me it was like da 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 da. So again, allowing you to connect with your student in a way that's going to meet them where they're at in terms of their feelings, not invalidating their feelings, but meeting them where they're at with those. Instead of using the word always, I've tried to use often or sometimes. Likewise with the word never, trying to replace it with occasionally. Those are two that are super hard for me. I'm very much a person that I guess goes to the extreme with always and never. But when working with my high ability child, I have tried to switch to those, and I can see after some time, after a considerable amount of time of replacing that, hearing her replace those words in her own vocabulary, and I saw a change in the way that she reacted and responded to me. And then finally, as parents, it would be helpful for us to convey courage, acknowledge learning, expect progress, not perfection, applaud their persistence, honor the time that they're investing, and help them to discover meaning and enjoyment in what they're doing. We all eventually fail at something, and when a gifted student eventually does, or something isn't perfect, again, to them, that's failure, or they don't understand a concept as quickly as they think they should, again, to them, that's failure, that is not being perfect. So when our high ability gifted student eventually has what they consider failure, it can really affect their self-esteem. We can also see them begin to give up or quit. If they can't make it perfect, they're just going to quit. Procrastinating, putting things off, or not even starting it because it just seems impossible to do perfectly, so why try? These things lead to that negative cycle of poor perseverance skills, and in turn then low self-esteem. So helping them to understand that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. It can be a challenge. Parents, I know, I get it. It can be a challenge, but this is where we need to focus, to try to help them get to that, that life doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. So using these tips, they may be of an aid as you're helping your kiddo to navigate the world, and to help them use those healthy coping strategies. Change doesn't happen overnight. Trust me, like I said, I've been there in the trenches with you. Change does not happen overnight, but it is possible. Thank you so much for joining me as we explored ways of connecting with, understanding, and helping our gifted kiddos who may struggle with perfectionistic tendencies. You're going to see on your screen there a couple of QR codes as well as my contact information, and I invite you to join me for more in our Gifted Education series. Coming up, I have Supporting My Highly Intelligent Child, Advocating for My Gifted Child, and I even have one coming up where I'm going to review a few books for you. So please, please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you'd just like to talk more about what we've covered in this episode. Remember, giftedness isn't a destination. It's a journey worth guiding. And thank you so much for walking alongside your gifted learner on this journey.